Michael didn't just lock them up, he forced them to watch their own children drown. You're watching the Forbidden Bible, where the hidden war of angels and demons, the ancient prophecies sealed for the last days, and the forbidden mysteries of Scripture are revealed with cinematic clarity. If you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon, because what you're about to discover may change the way you understand heaven, the unseen realm, and your place within it. Most people know the story of the Great Flood as a tale of a big boat and a lot of rain. But buried within the ancient Aramaic scrolls and the suppressed Book of Enoch lies a much darker reality. A reality where Archangel Michael, heaven's greatest strategist, didn't just implement a punishment, he designed a psychological hell for the beings who dared to defy God. Today, we go beyond the Sunday school version to uncover what Michael truly did to the fallen angels and the monstrous legacy they left behind. Imagine a world where the boundary between heaven and earth didn't just blur, it shattered. These weren't your typical angels with golden harps. These were the Watchers, powerful, celestial sentinels tasked with guarding humanity. But as they gazed down from the heights of Mount Hermon, they saw something they weren't supposed to, the raw beauty of human women. It started with a whisper of desire, but it ended in a cosmic treason. 200 angels, led by Shemi-Hazar, made a pact that would stain the DNA of the earth forever. They didn't just fall, they invaded. They descended to earth, took wives, and in doing so, they unleashed a biological nightmare. From these forbidden unions came the Nephilim. In your typical Bible story, they're just giants. But historical fragments describe them as something far more terrifying. They were hybrids, genetically superior, massive in stature, and possessed an insatiable hunger that the earth could not sustain. At first, they demanded the grain, then the livestock. But as their numbers grew and their bodies towered over the tallest trees, their hunger turned predatory. They began to see humanity not as their kin, but as a harvest. This wasn't just a physical threat, it was a total takeover. These giants didn't just eat humans, they enslaved them, demanding to be worshipped as living gods. They built monuments to their own ego, forcing mothers and fathers to bow before the very monsters that would eventually consume their children. The world became a slaughterhouse. The Nephilim were the corruption of all flesh, a virus that was rewriting the blueprint of God's creation. They were turning Eden into an altar of blood, and the fallen angels, the fathers of these monsters, stood by and watched with pride. They thought they had won. They thought they had replaced God's kingdom with their own dynasty of giants. But they forgot one thing. Michael was watching. And Michael doesn't just fight, he executes justice. The cries didn't start with words. They started with the terrifying sound of the earth itself, breaking under a weight it was never meant to carry. Under the colossal footsteps of the Nephilim, the very tectonic plates of the world seemed to groan in agony. This wasn't just a localized crisis, it was a global extinction event happening in slow motion. Ancient texts, suppressed for centuries, describe a world where the air was permanently thick with the smell of iron and the rivers ran a deep, bruised black. Imagine being a father in that era. You've spent your entire life building a sanctuary for your family, only to watch a 4-story tall nightmare crush it into splinters under a single, indifferent footstep. There was no hiding. The Nephilim didn't just walk the earth. They dominated every inch of it. If you fled to the highest mountains, these giants used their immense strength to pull screaming people from caves like ants being dug out of a nest. If you disappeared into the densest forests, their shadows loomed over the canopy, searching. Humanity was being methodically erased, not by a natural disaster, but by a biological abomination that violated every law of God's creation. They were predators, and we were nothing more than insects to be stepped on or swallowed. But the physical terror was only the surface. The forbidden Bible sources and the fragments of the Book of Giants suggest a much deeper, more sinister trauma: the total corruption of the human spirit. The fallen angels didn't just give the Nephilim physical might, they handed them the keys to forbidden technology and dark metaphysics. They taught humans the art of the blade, the forging of weapons specifically designed to maximize pain and slaughter. They introduced enchantments to trap the human soul and astrology to manipulate the fate of nations. The prayers of the few righteous souls left weren't just asking for food or shelter anymore, they were begging for a genetic reset. Every drop of blood spilled by a Nephilim was a metaphysical scream that reached the gates of heaven, vibrating through the celestial realms. The Book of Enoch tells us that the earth herself laid an official accusation against the lawless ones. The planetary DNA was so thoroughly polluted by this angelic-human hybrid experiment that the original blueprint of life, the very image of God in man, was on the verge of being overwritten by a demonic code. The world wasn't just suffering, it was becoming a factory of darkness where human souls were the raw material. Up until this breaking point, heaven had remained in a state of chilling silence. To the humans trembling in the mud below, it felt like God had turned his back on his creation. They looked up at a sunless sky, heavy with the smoke of destroyed cities, and saw only the cruel, glowing eyes of their giant overlords peering through the clouds. But this silence wasn't absence. It was the terrifying stillness of a storm, gathering its strength. The great archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, stood at the very edge of the celestial veil, their eyes burning with holy indignation as they witnessed the carnage. They saw their former brothers, the Watchers, sitting on earthly thrones made of human bone, reveling in the chaos they had fathered. The silent cries of the victims had finally created a resonance that shattered the peace of the higher realms. The tension in heaven was now at a lethal breaking point. It was time for the sword of Michael to be unsheathed, but Michael knew that a simple military strike wouldn't suffice to purge this level of filth. To fix a world this broken, he needed a masterstroke, a plan so absolute it would not only destroy the monsters, but would haunt the souls of the fallen for the rest of eternity. The divine chessboard was set, and the first move was about to be made. The great halls of heaven, usually echoing with harmony, were now a sanctuary of cold, lethal silence. Before the throne of the Ancient of Days, the four archangels stood, each a pillar of celestial power, yet each divided on how to save a world that was literally drowning in its own blood. Gabriel, the messenger of mercy, was the first to speak. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of a dying planet. The humans are fading. If we do not act now, the very memory of our Father's creation will be erased by these genetic abominations. Uriel, the angel of wisdom and light, looked down through the clouds at the Nephilim kings. The corruption is not just skin deep, he countered. It's in the soil. It's in the DNA. We must test the bloodlines. We must find the one remaining branch of the human tree that hasn't been grafted with demonic code. Raphael, the healer, shook his head in mourning. Healing is no longer an option for the earth. The poison is everywhere. We need a purge, a complete cleansing of the canvas. Then Michael stepped forward. As heaven's supreme commander, his presence shifted the energy of the room from debate to execution. He didn't just want to destroy the giants, he wanted to dismantle the spirit of the fallen angels. "Death is too easy for our fallen brothers." Michael's voice boomed, vibrating through the crystal floors. They wanted to be gods. They wanted to build a dynasty of flesh. So, we will let them watch their dynasty burn. Michael proposed a plan that was as brilliant as it was terrifying. He wouldn't lead a direct angelic army to slaughter the Nephilim. Instead, he would turn the Nephilim against each other. He would stir the greed and the bloodlust within the giants until they tore their own families apart. He wanted the fallen angels chained in the darkness of the valleys to be forced to witness their own children, their mighty sons, devouring one another in a cannibalistic frenzy. This was Michael's dark justice, to use the very evil the fallen had created as the instrument of their eternal torment. But amidst the plan for destruction, there was a need for a seed of hope. God agreed with the archangels. The world needed to be reset, but the human story could not end. Uriel was tasked with scouring the earth for a pure genetic key, a man whose lineage had remained untouched by the angelic experiment. This search led them to a man named Noah. He wasn't chosen because he was a perfect saint, but because his DNA remained perfect in his generations. The archangels received their orders. Gabriel would prepare the warning, Raphael would preserve the life seed, and Michael would begin the invisible psychological warfare that would make the giants destroy themselves before the first drop of rain even hit the ground. The divine chess match was over. The execution had begun. In a world saturated with the toxic, mutated DNA of the fallen, one man stood as a biological anomaly, Noah. But forget the frail, white-bearded old man from children's storybooks. To survive in an age of giants and monsters, Noah had to be a fortress of faith and immense physical resilience. When the Forbidden Bible mentions Noah was perfect in his generations, it's not just referring to his morality, it's a technical term for his bloodline. He was the last human whose genetic code had not been hacked or corrupted by the angelic experiment. He was the divine seed-bearer, the only biological vessel capable of restarting the human race from a clean, unpolluted slate. The instructions Noah received were baffling and physically monumental. He was told to build a vessel of gopher wood, a massive ark, in the middle of a dry, scorched landscape where the very concept of rain had become a distant memory. This wasn't just a boat, it was a floating laboratory of life, designed by divine architecture to withstand a planetary-scale cosmic reset. For over a century, the rhythmic sound of Noah's hammer was a prophetic warning to a civilization that had long ago stopped listening to the whispers of heaven. Every plank of wood he laid was a testament to a future that no one else believed in, a desperate gamble for the survival of the original human blueprint. As the ark took shape, looming like a wooden mountain over the valley, it became a prime target for the Nephilim's mockery. Imagine the scene. These towering, golden-skinned demigods, 10 times the size of a man, leaning against the hull of the ark with arrogant ease. Their voices sounded like rolling thunder as they laughed at Noah's insanity. "Old man," they would roar, their voices shaking the ground, "you build a wooden box for a flood that will never come? We are the masters of this dimension. We have conquered the earth, the seas, and even the stars. What can a little water do to a god who can move mountains?" The Nephilim didn't just mock Noah. They conducted psychological warfare. They saw the ark as a monument to a god they believed they had outgrown. They would surround his construction site, performing dark, blood-soaked rituals and flaunting their hybrid powers, levitating stones or manipulating the elements trying to break Noah's resolve. But Noah didn't fight back with steel or insults. He fought with absolute persistence. While the giants feasted on human flesh and planned an eternal demonic empire, Noah was quietly gathering the genetic remnant. Under the guidance of Raphael, he secured pairs of animals whose DNA remained pure, along with ancient seeds that predated the angelic corruption. He was building a coffin for the old rotting world and a cradle for the new one, right under the noses of the monsters who intended to rule forever. Why didn't the Nephilim, with their immense strength, simply crush the ark into splinters? This is where the hidden wisdom of the scrolls provides an answer. Ancient fragments suggest the ark was encased in an invisible celestial barrier. While Noah hammered wood on the physical plane, Michael and his legions of warrior angels stood in the unseen realms, swords of light drawn, encircling the construction site. The giants felt a strange, paralyzing dread whenever they attempted to sabotage the structure. They sensed a looming shadow of justice, a cold, divine inevitability they thought they had escaped. As the final plank was secured and the massive door stood open, the very atmosphere of the earth shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone. The mocking laughter of the Nephilim began to falter as a strange, black wall of clouds appeared on the horizon, a storm that looked like nothing from their world. The watchman's duty was complete. Noah had finished the vessel. Now, the Creator was about to finish the trial. The time for mercy had ended. The great purge had arrived. The first drop of rain didn't just fall, it struck the earth like a bullet. Then the sky didn't just open, it tore. The ancient Aramaic texts describe the fountains of the great deep bursting forth, meaning the earth's crust literally cracked, geysers of ancient pressurized water screaming into the atmosphere. For the Nephilim, the initial reaction was confusion, then arrogance. They stood on the plains, their massive chests heaving, laughing as the water reached their ankles. "Is this the great judge's wrath?" they roared. "A bath?" But the laughter died when the water didn't stop. By the second day, the valleys were gone. By the 10th, the forests were submerged. The Nephilim, for the first time in their immortal lives, felt the cold grip of biological terror. These giants, who had spent centuries enslaving humanity and demanding worship, were now reduced to frantic animals. They scrambled up the highest peaks, pushing and trampling each other, their golden skin bruised and their divine arrogance replaced by a primal, stuttering fear. They looked to the stars for their fathers, the fallen angels, to save them, but the sky was silent except for the roar of the drowning world. As the water rose, the true execution began not on the earth, but in the unseen dimensions. Archangel Michael had already rounded up the 200 fallen angels. He didn't just cast them into a dark pit, he performed a dark justice that was far more agonizing. Using celestial chains forged from their own broken oaths, Michael bound the watchers in the valleys of the earth, suspended in a state of spiritual paralysis. Here is the twist that the Sunday school version misses. Michael forced them to keep their eyes open. He granted them a cursed vision, allowing them to see through the storm, directly to their children, the Nephilim below. The fallen angels were forced to watch their mighty sons struggle against the rising tides. They heard the psychic screams of their offspring as they gasped for air. They watched as the very giants they had sired for world domination turned on one another, drowning each other in a desperate attempt to reach higher ground. Michael's message was clear. You wanted to create a dynasty of flesh? Now, watch that flesh rot. This wasn't just a flood, it was a front-row seat to the extinction of their own legacy. For 40 days, the fathers wept in their chains, while their sons vanished beneath the waves. The ark, meanwhile, rose silently above the carnage. Inside, Noah and the remnant were safe, but they could hear the dull thuds of giants banging against the wooden hull, begging for a mercy that was no longer available. The invisible shield of Michael's legions kept the desperate Nephilim from damaging the vessel. One by one, the towering shadows disappeared into the abyss. The genetic experiment was over. The virus that had threatened to delete the image of God from the world was being washed away by the very element that gives life. When the last mountain peak vanished under the grey churning water, a terrifying silence fell over the planet. The Nephilim were gone. The earth was a blank slate once more. Michael tightened the seals on the fallen angels' prison, condemning them to 70 generations of darkness, where the only thing they would remember was the sight of their children's final, futile struggle. The execution was complete. The world was dead, but for the first time in centuries it was clean. The stage was set for a new sunrise, and a promise that would be written in the colors of the light. The retreat of the waters was not a quiet event. It was the slow, rhythmic exhaling of a planet that had been suffocated. As the ark settled upon the jagged peaks of Ararat, a heavy, sacred silence descended. When Noah opened the massive door, the air that rushed in wasn't just fresh, it was sanctified. The scent of wet earth and ozone filled the lungs of the survivors, a stark contrast to the smell of iron and decay that had defined the era of the Nephilim. The world was empty, yes, but it was finally quiet. The dominion of the giants had been erased, replaced by a pristine, raw wilderness, waiting for a new story to be written. Noah, his family, and the genetic remnant stepped onto a world that felt fragile. As they offered their first sacrifice, a bridge of light suddenly fractured the grey sky. But in the forbidden Bible perspective, this wasn't just a pretty sign of the weather changing. This was the prism of peace, a divine technology deployed by the archangels. Most traditions see the rainbow as a mere promise that God won't drown the world again. But ancient esoteric fragments suggest a much more strategic purpose. The rainbow was a dimensional seal. After the chaos caused by the Watchers, Michael and his legions realized that the gates between the celestial and terrestrial realms were too porous. The fallen angels had exploited these gaps to descend and corrupt human DNA. The rainbow was the seal of the 7 colors, a spectrum of light that acted as a vibrational barrier. It was a sign to the spiritual principalities and powers that the physical realm was now under a different jurisdiction. By placing his bow in the clouds, the Creator wasn't just putting away a weapon, he was setting a permanent boundary. It served as a warning to any other rebellious entities in the higher dimensions. The earth is now protected. The gateway is closed. The colors represented the 7 attributes of divine justice and mercy, woven into the very atmosphere to prevent another unauthorized genetic invasion. God's instructions to the survivors were a reset of the original mandate to be caretakers, not tyrants. But the memory of the giants remained as a scar on the collective psyche of humanity. The archangels transitioned into their new roles as invisible guardians. Michael became the prince of the people, tasked with ensuring that no demonic bloodline would ever rise to such global dominance again. The world began to bloom. Greenery crawled over the scars of the flood. Life began to pulse once more, but with a new awareness. The rainbow hung in the sky as a reminder of the price of corruption. It was a bridge that no man could walk, and no fallen angel could cross. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the remnant had begun. But as the generations passed, would humanity remember that the rainbow wasn't just a sign of hope, but a lock on a door that must never be opened again? The waters of the flood receded, but they couldn't wash away the memory embedded in the very bones of the earth. As centuries turned into millennia, the story of the Nephilim shifted from terrifying reality to distant myth. But for those who know where to look, the world is filled with controversial relics, massive bones, and elongated skulls found in ancient burial sites that continue to defy mainstream explanation. From the enigmatic findings unearthed in remote excavations to the strange skeletal remains discovered in ancient mounds, many believe these are the genetic echoes of the fallen that Michael tried to bury. These aren't just anomalies, they are the architectural and biological fossils of a civilization built by strength that was not human. Even today, on storm-racked nights, locals in the mountains of the Middle East speak of whispers in the wind, vibrations from the deep places where Michael's chains still hold. The fallen angels are bound, but their influence remains a haunting shadow, leaving behind breadcrumbs of forbidden knowledge for any generation arrogant enough to pick them up. We live in an age that prides itself on unlocking every secret of the universe. But what if some doors were meant to stay locked? The Forbidden Bible warns that in the end times, the world will mirror the days of Noah. Today, we aren't building towers of stone. We are building towers of silicon and synthetic DNA. Through CRISPR technology, transhumanism, and the pursuit of digital immortality, humanity is once again flirting with the same genetic treason that triggered the flood. We are trying to edit the blueprint that Michael fought so hard to protect. The rainbow seal is still there, a vibrant reminder of the boundary between the divine and the mortal. But as we push into forbidden sciences, we are effectively trying to pick the lock on that celestial door. The archangels haven't lowered their guard. Michael, the great prince, still watches the gates, sensing the rising tide of human hubris. The question isn't whether the giants will return in the flesh, but whether we have already allowed their spirit of rebellion to take root in our machines and our souls. History is a circle, not a line. The Great Flood was a reset, a moment of agonizing mercy to prevent the total corruption of the human spirit. As you look at the world today, ask yourself, are we repeating the mistakes of the Watchers? Are we trading our humanity for a hybrid power we cannot control? Michael is still heaven's greatest warrior, and he is still protecting us, not just from external demons, but from our own desire to be as gods. Don't ignore the echoes. The next time you see a rainbow, don't just see a pretty light. See a seal, see a promise, and most importantly, see a warning. The giants fell once, and the world was washed clean. If we break the seal again, there may not be another ark to save us. Want to know more about the specific weapons Michael used in the Great War of Heaven? Click the video on your screen right now to discover the true power of the Prince of Angels.